My nephew slid a pen across the table and told a room full of my neighbors that I was too far gone to know what my own name was worth. His wife laughed and said, "Bless his heart, Uncle Wendell cannot even read a gauge anymore, so Trent handles the money now." I did not raise my voice. I did not stand up and holler the way a younger man might have. I reached into my coat and I slid a plain manila envelope back across that table, and when he tore it open and saw what was folded up inside, the grin came off his face like old paint off a hot pipe. If you have just found this story, go on and pour yourself a cup of coffee and sit down a minute, because what my own brother's boy tried to do to me is the kind of thing you pray never comes crawling out of your own blood. My name is Wendell Boyd. I am 76 years old, and I spent 41 years in the oil patch out here in western Oklahoma, most of them as a driller and then a lease pumper, which is a plain way of saying I am the fellow who reads the gauges and keeps the wells honest. Before I take you back to the start of this, do me one small kindness. Tell me down in the comments what kind of work your hands learned first. The one thing you could still do in the dark, with your eyes shut because your body just never forgot it. I like to sit of an evening and read those. And if this old voice keeps you company tonight, go on and tap that little like button so more folks my age can find their way to this porch. Now let me back the truck up and start where it started. I was born a mile from where I am sitting right now, in a county I will call Artis, out where the wheat runs up against the sand hills and the wind never once asked your permission. My daddy was a driller before me. He used to say the ground does not lie to you. Rock is rock. Water is water, gas is gas. A man will look you in the eye and tell you a well is going to pay when the mudlog already told him it never will. But the ground itself has never once told me a lie in 76 years, and I built a whole life on trusting it more than I trusted most people. I married Loretta this spring. I turned 23. She taught school in a 2-room building out on a county road for 31 years, and I promise you, there are grown men in 3 states who still stand up a little straighter when her name comes up, because she was the one who taught them their letters and would not let them quit. Loretta passed 2 years ago this coming fall. A stroke took her in her sleep, which everybody keeps telling me was a mercy, and I suppose it was, though nobody asks the man left behind whether he wanted the mercy. I still make the coffee for 2 out of pure habit and pour 1 cup down the sink. I am not ashamed to tell you that. Loretta and I were a good team the way a driller and a mudman are a good team. I knew the machinery and the rock. She knew people, and she knew paper, and she knew money in a way I never bothered to. I was the kind of man who could tell you the pressure on a well 2 miles down, but could not tell you where our own checkbook was. She kept the books at that kitchen table with a mechanical pencil and a coffee can full of receipts, and she read every contract that ever came into our house twice, once for what it said and once for what it was trying not to say. I used to tease her about it. I would say, "Loretta, nobody is coming for a school teacher and a pumper." And she would look at me over her glasses and say, "Wendell, the ones who come for people like us are counting on exactly that kind of thinking." I did not understand how right she was until she had been in the ground 2 years, and my own blood came for me counting on it. Here is the part you need to understand, because the whole story hangs on it. Back in the good years, when I was still climbing the derrick and Loretta was still grading spelling tests at the kitchen table, we owned the old home quarter, the ground my daddy left me. In the middle of a hard stretch, we sold the surface of it to our neighbor so he could run cattle, but Loretta made me do one thing before I signed. She made me reserve the minerals. She said, "Wendell, you sell a man the grass and the dirt if you have to, but you do not ever sell him what is underneath, because what is underneath is the part your daddy bled for." So I kept the minerals. The oil and the gas rights under that quarter section stayed with us even after the surface went to the neighbor. At the time, it did not seem like much. Nobody was drilling anything out there. It was just paper in a drawer. But Loretta was not done being smart. A few years on, she read a piece in a farm magazine about old folks getting cheated out of their mineral rights, and she did not rest until we drove into Tulsa and sat down with a lawyer and put those minerals into a trust. She named it plain. She called it the Loretta Boyd Family Mineral Trust, and she did something I did not fully appreciate until I was an old man. She would not let me be the only one holding the reins. She insisted we name an independent trustee, the trust department of a bank in Tulsa, a set of people with no dog in our family fight, whose only job under the law was to do right by what the trust said. And the trust said the money those minerals ever made was to be split 2 ways. Half was to go to our only grandbaby, and half was to seed a scholarship at the little school where Loretta taught, so some barefoot kid out here could go on and be a nurse or a teacher or whatever the Lord pointed them at. We recorded every bit of it down at the county clerk's office. Loretta said, "Now it is on the public record, Wendell, and a public record does not forget the way people do. Our only grandbaby is a girl named June. She is 24 now. Her daddy was our boy Danny, and we lost Danny young on a rig floor down in the Anadarko Basin when a chain let go. So June is all we have left of him, and I will be honest and tell you she is the whole reason my heart still beats regular. She is up in Tulsa right now finishing nursing school, working nights at a nursing home to pay her own way even though she does not have to, because she is Loretta's blood and Loretta never once took a thing she had not earned. June did not know the first thing about what those minerals were worth. Neither did I, if you want the truth of it. For 30 years, they made us nothing but a Christmas card from an oil company and maybe $40 a year. And then, about a year and a half ago, everything under that quarter section changed. A big operator came into Artis County and started drilling the long horizontal wells, the kind that run sideways under the ground for 2 miles and drink out of a whole spread of rock the old vertical wells never could reach. They spaced a new unit right across our home quarter. When they pooled it through the Oklahoma Corporation Commission, and the first of those long wells came in, the checks stopped being a Christmas card. They got real. Real enough that people who had never once come to Loretta's funeral suddenly remembered they were family. I will explain that pooling business plain because it matters later. Out here, an operator who wants to drill one of those long wells has to gather up all the little pieces of mineral ownership under a whole big rectangle of ground, what they call a spacing unit. Some folks lease willing, some hold out. So the state, through that corporation commission down in Oklahoma City, holds a hearing and forces everybody into the unit on fair terms, so one stubborn holdout cannot block a well that would pay 100 families. It is a public process. There are records of it a foot thick. And once the well produces, the operator owes every owner in that unit their exact decimal share of the money, figured off the recorded title. Off the record, always off the record. That is the whole spine of this story, so hold on to it. The oil company does not pay who says they own it. The oil company pays who the county records say owns it. My nephew, a professional landman, a man who dealt in exactly these records for a living, knew that better than anybody. He knew the record was king, and he decided he would just go make the record lie. I want to introduce you to my brother's boy now, because he is the man on the other side of that table in the envelope. My younger brother Roy passed a long while back, and Roy left one son, my nephew, and I will call him Trent. Trent is 41 years old. He grew up out here same as I did, but he could not get shed of this county fast enough. He went off to the city and became what they call a landman, which is a man who deals in oil and gas leases and mineral titles for a living. Now understand me. That is honest work when it is done honest. A good landman is worth his weight. But Trent had gotten himself into a bad spot, the kind of spot a man does not advertise at Thanksgiving. He had put his own money and a pile of borrowed money into a drilling deal that went dry. A dry hole with a hard money lender behind it is about the worst kind of quiet trouble a man can carry, and Trent was carrying it. I need you to understand something about my brother Roy because it makes what his boy did sit even heavier on my chest. Roy and I grew up hard, in a 2-room house with a wood stove and a mother who prayed over beans like they were a feast. When our daddy would be gone off to the rigs for weeks, it was Roy and me against the whole world. I taught that boy to fish the tank dam and to drive the old truck sitting on a phone book because his legs were too short to reach the pedals. When Roy got sick at the end, cancer, it was me who sat up with him nights, and it was me who promised him, holding his hand in a hospital just like the one they put my stent in, that I would look after Trent. I told my dying brother I would treat his boy like my own. And I did. I paid for part of Trent's schooling. I co-signed his first truck. When he got married, I gave the toast. So when Trent came for me, he was not just robbing an old man. He was spitting on a promise I made to his father on his deathbed. That is the part I could not forgive, and I will not pretend I have found a way to yet. The last thing you need before I take you into it. About 8 months before that room full of neighbors, I had a spell with my heart. Nothing dramatic. I got dizzy loading feed and went down on one knee in the barn, and June made me go to the hospital, and they put a little stent in and sent me home in 3 days telling me to quit lifting sacks. But word gets around to small county fast, and by the time I was home, the story out there was that old Wendell Boyd's ticker had gone bad and his mind was probably right behind it. Trent came around that week. He was warm as a July afternoon. He said, "Uncle Wendell, you have carried this family long enough. Let me carry some of the paperwork now." He brought a durable power of attorney all typed up, and he was so kind and so worried about me that I signed it, and I handed my only brother's only son the keys to my whole life. I want you to remember that I did that, because everything that comes next grew straight up out of that one soft, trusting mistake. Now, a lease pumper is a creature of habit. For 41 years, my job was to drive the lease roads at first light, climb the tank battery, drop a steel gauge line down into the dark of the tank, and read the brass bob at the bottom to know exactly how much oil was in there. You cannot fool a gauge line. It does not care that the operator wants the number to be higher. It does not care that you are tired or that your knees hurt. You drop the line, you read the brass, and the number is the number. That habit does not retire when you do. So even after they told me to quit lifting feed sacks, I never once quit reading my own mail. I read every statement that came to that house the way I read a tank, slow and all the way to the bottom. And that is how it started to come apart for them. One morning in the spring, an envelope came from the oil company. It was a division order, which is the paper an operator sends out to say, "Here is your decimal share of this new well. Please confirm who you are so we can pay you." Only this division order did not have my name on the payment line, and it did not have the trust name either. It had the name of an outfit I had never heard of in my life, Red Fork Royalty, a limited liability company. I sat at Loretta's kitchen table with that paper for a long time. Then I did what my daddy taught me. I stopped guessing and I went and read the ground. I drove into the county seat the next morning and I walked into the courthouse and up to the county clerk's window, where every deed and every mineral conveyance in Artis County gets recorded and kept for anybody to see. That is the thing city people forget. The record is public. It belongs to all of us. I asked the clerk, a patient young woman, to pull everything filed against my home quarter in the last year. She printed it out and set the pages in front of me on the counter, and I put on my reading glasses and I read every line to the bottom the way I read a tank. There it was, a mineral deed filed just 11 weeks before purporting to convey all of my oil and gas interest under that quarter section out of Wendell Boyd and into Red Fork Royalty, a limited liability company. And down near the bottom, right above the typed line where my full name was printed out, sat a signature, or a fine copy of one. It had the hard cross on the T and the long tail I drag off the Y. Whoever drew it had studied my hand, but I had not signed it. I had never in my life laid eyes on that paper before that morning at the county clerk's window. And beside my forged name was a notary stamp and the signature of the notary who swore she had watched me sign it. The notary was a woman named Danielle, Trent's wife. I want to tell you my blood ran cold, and it did, but not the way you might think. It ran cold, and it ran slow, and it ran clear, the way the pressure comes up steady on a good well, because standing at that window, I knew something Trent did not know I knew. I knew that mineral deed was not worth the ink it was printed in. And here is why, and this is the part I want every one of you to hear because it may be the most useful thing an old pumper ever tells you. That deed said it was conveying my minerals out of Wendell Boyd, the man. But Wendell Boyd, the man, had not owned those minerals in 20 years. Loretta and I had put them into the Loretta Boyd Family Mineral Trust 2 decades back, and we had recorded that assignment right there, in that same clerk's office, with a date stamp on it that was older than my nephew's marriage. You cannot steal a thing from a man who gave it away 20 years ago. Trent had forged a deed to move minerals out of my personal name, and my personal name had been empty of those minerals since before he ever needed money. He had drawn a beautiful, careful, felony forgery, and he had forged the wrong man, conveying a thing that was not his to convey. The trust owned it. An independent bank in Tulsa was the trustee, and the record proved it with a date in a public office where it had sat quietly the whole time, doing its job in the dark like a cement job down a well. That is what Loretta built. She did not build it so she could win an argument someday. She built it so that on the worst morning of my old age, I could stand at a courthouse window and already be holding the answer. In the patch, you set your casing and you cement it in the good years, down in the dark where nobody ever claps for you. Precisely so, the well still stands the day the pressure finally comes up. Loretta cemented our casing 20 years before I needed it. God rest her, she was a better driller than I ever was. But knowing the deed was worthless did not mean I was safe, and I want you to understand why. Because this is where it got dangerous. Trent had my power of attorney. That piece of paper I signed in my hospital fog gave him the power to act in my name on a great many things. He could not use it to reach inside the trust because the trust had its own independent trustee and its own rules, and that is exactly the wall Loretta built. But he could use it to make an ungodly mess. He was already redirecting the operator's checks to that Red Fork company by filing false division orders in my name. And I learned soon enough that he had started leaning on me to sign what he called a pooling ratification. A piece of paper he swore up and down was just a routine oil company formality for the new well. It was not routine. I had read enough oil and gas paper in my life to smell it. What he wanted was for me to personally ratify and bless everything he had done, to put my real, living signature on top of his forgery so that later, If it ever came apart, he could hold up a paper I actually signed and say, "See, Uncle Wendell agreed to all of it." The old man knew exactly what he was doing. And here is a thing worth knowing that most folks do not. Out here, since a change in the law a few years back, an operator cannot force a mineral owner to sign a division order just to get paid. You do not have to ratify a blessed thing to receive your own money. So the very fact that Trent was pushing so hard for my signature on a ratification told me everything. A man does not fight that hard for a signature he does not need, unless he needs it to cover something. So I had two clocks running against me, and I could feel them both. The first clock was the oil company itself. Those long horizontal wells had come in strong, and the trust's rightful share was going to be somewhere around $11,000 a month, month after month, for years to come. That is life-changing money for a scholarship and a nursing student. Every month that Trent's false division order stood, that money was flowing to Red Fork instead of into the trust and getting harder to claw back. The second clock was Trent's own trouble. His hard money lender back in the city was closing in on him for that dry hole, and a cornered man moves fast and stupid. The sooner he could squeeze real money out of my minerals, the sooner he could quiet his lender. His fear was my danger. I could feel him about to do something reckless. Now, a younger man, a hotter man, would have driven straight to the city and put his fist to my nephew's front door. I will not pretend the thought did not cross my mind. But I have watched a lot of wells over a lot of years, and I have learned that the ones that blow out are the ones where somebody got scared and jerked the wrong valve. You do not fix a dangerous well by yelling at it. You shut it in calm and slow, you find where the pressure is really coming from, and you kill it by the numbers. So I made myself a promise, standing in that courthouse. I was not going to give Trent one single sign that I had read the ground. I was going to let him keep believing exactly what he already believed, that the old man's heart was weak and his mind was weaker, and the minerals were his for the taking. I folded the printouts, and I paid the clerk her copy fee, and I told her thank you kindly, and I drove home the speed limit the whole way. And that afternoon, I made 2 telephone calls. Not to the police, not yet. The first call was to an oil and gas attorney in Tulsa named Ruth Delgado, a woman Loretta had picked out years ago, sharp as a fishhook and twice as hard to shake loose. The second call was to the trust department at the bank, the independent trustee, the very people Loretta had insisted on all those years back when I thought she was being overcareful. It turned out my dead wife had left me a whole crew, already hired, already waiting, for a day she hoped would never come. Ruth Delgado listened to the whole thing without saying a word, which is a rare and beautiful quality in a lawyer. When I finished, she asked me to bring her the courthouse printouts, the division order, and the power of attorney, and she told me not to sign one more piece of paper for anyone, not for the oil company, not for Trent, not for the president himself. Then she laid it out for me plain. The forged mineral deed my nephew had offered up at the county clerk's window was not a family squabble. Under Oklahoma law, knowingly offering a false or forged instrument to be recorded in a public office is a felony, flat out. Forging my signature was a felony, and his wife swearing a notary oath that she watched me sign a paper I never saw was its own crime laid on top of the others. Ruth said, "Wendell, your nephew did not bend a rule. He broke 3 or 4 laws and put them all on the public record with his wife's stamp on them. He built us a confession out of county records without meaning to. She told me something else that day that I want to pass to you because it is the kind of thing folks get wrong and it costs them everything. She said the reason Trent could not simply reach in and grab the minerals, the reason he had to forge and lie instead of just filing some papers, was the trust itself. A lot of people think, oh, will protects them. A will is a fine thing, but a will does not do one blessed thing until you are dead, and then it goes through probate, which is a slow public court process where a judge sorts out your estate and anybody can stand up and fight over it. A trust is different. A trust holds the property while you are still alive, out of your personal hands, under its own rules, watched over by a trustee who answers to the law. Loretta had put the minerals somewhere Trent's forgery could not reach because they were not in my personal name for him to forge them out of. Ruth said, "Most folks your age have a will and think they are covered, and then a relative with a pen empties them out while they are still breathing. Your wife knew the difference. It is why you still have anything to fight over." I sat in that lawyer's office and I thought, Loretta, you never once let me thank you enough. The trustee at the bank moved just as calm and just as sure. Because the recorded trust assignment was older and stood first in the chain of title, the bank, as the rightful trustee, could go straight to the oil company and demand the division order be corrected. When an operator learns there is a title dispute and a possible forgery on a tract, the division order people do not pay it out to anybody. They put the money in what they call suspense, which is a fancy word for a locked drawer, and it sits there until the true owner is proven. So within a matter of days, quietly, without one loud word, the checks Trent thought were pouring into his Red Fork company stopped pouring anywhere at all. He just did not know it yet. Now I could have let the lawyers and the bank finish it right there. It would have been clean. But I want to be honest with you about my own heart, because this channel is not worth much if I lie to you. I did not just want the paperwork unwound. I wanted the truth of it out in the open, in the daylight, where it could not be argued away. I knew my nephew. If federal-looking men in suits knocked on his door, he would cry, hire a slick lawyer with money that was not his, and swear on his mother's grave that senile old Uncle Wendell had verbally agreed to every bit of it, that he was only helping family, that there had been a terrible misunderstanding. He would turn my weakness into his defense. So I told Ruth I wanted to give him room. I wanted to let him keep believing he had won, right up until the moment there was no argument left to make. She looked at me a long while, and then she almost smiled, and she said, "All right, Wendell, we will let him drive his own truck into the ditch. We will just make sure the whole county is standing there when he does." June came home that next weekend, and I sat her down at the kitchen table and I told her everything. I did not soften it because she is a grown woman and Danny's daughter and she had earned the truth. She cried a little, not for herself and not for the money, but for me. Because it is a hard thing to learn that a man you fed at your own table when he was a boy would forge your name and mock your dead wife. But then she wiped her face and she got that look her grandmother used to get, and she said, "All right, what do we do?" And it was June, God bless her, who handed us the sharpest piece of the whole case. She remembered that Danielle, Trent's wife, was one of those people who put every little thing on the computer for the world to see, and June remembered scrolling past a picture Danielle had posted months back, bragging on herself for closing some big fancy house sale in the city. June went back and found it. And the date on that picture, the morning Danielle stood grinning in front of a mansion 90 miles away, was the very same morning Danielle had sworn, under her notary oath, that she stood in this county and watched me sign a deed. My granddaughter found the crack in the whole thing from her phone at the nursing home on her lunch break. Ruth Delgado about came through the telephone when I told her. She said, "Wendell, your girl just handed us the nail for the coffin. Send me that, and do not you dare say one word to your nephew. If you have ever been written off as too old and too worn down to know what your own name is worth, if anybody has ever patted you on the head and reached for your wallet in the very same motion, do an old man a kindness and subscribe to this channel before we go on. Because what happened on my front porch 3 evenings later is the part where a quiet man decides he has had enough, and I would surely like you along for the rest of it." I called Trent and I let my voice do the acting my heart could not stomach. I made myself sound tired and small and grateful. I told him my chest had been bothering me and my thinking had gotten cloudy, and I said, "Son, come on out to the home place after supper. Help me get all this oil paperwork straightened out. I cannot keep it all in my head anymore." He was out there by dark. He came up the drive in a truck that cost more than my first house, and he sat down in Loretta's chair on the porch without asking, and I let him. I had my old phone in my shirt pocket and it was recording, because out here in Oklahoma, a man is allowed to keep a record of his own conversation, and I had decided I was done being the only one in the family who forgot nothing. I played the fool for him. I said, "Trent, help me understand this Red Fork business. My head just gets fuzzy." And my nephew, God forgive him, could not resist. He thought he was talking to a beaten old man who would be gone before it mattered. He leaned back in my dead wife's chair and he told me. He said, "Uncle Wendell, you do not need to understand it. That is the whole point. You just need to sign where I show you." He said the minerals were sitting there making money and I was too old to manage it, so he had, in his words, streamlined things. He said Aunt Loretta's little scholarship was a waste, that it was sentimental foolishness, throwing good oil money at kids who were going to pump gas in this county their whole lives anyway. He said June did not need a nurse's paycheck when there was real money on the table. And then he said the thing I will hear in my ears until they put me in the ground. He said, "Look, if you fight me on this, it is not hard to get a doctor to say a man your age with a bad heart cannot manage his own affairs, and then it will not matter what you sign or do not sign." He said it easy, the way you would mention the weather. I did not move. I did not let my face change. 41 years of reading gauges in front of company men who wanted a different number had taught me to keep a still face over a running mind. But inside, something that had been holding on by a thread for a year and a half finally let go. Not into rage. Into a cold, clear, level place, the calmest I had felt since Loretta died. My brother's boy had just sat in her chair and mocked her life's work, threatened to have me declared a lunatic, and dismissed my Danny's orphan girl as not worth a nurse's wage. He had also, into the microphone in my shirt pocket, described a felony in his own confident voice. I let him finish. I even let him think he had scared me a little because a frightened old man is exactly what he needed me to be. I said, "All right, son, all right, let me think on it." He stood up, satisfied, and he clapped me on the shoulder like I was a dog that had finally stopped barking, and he told me the oil company was holding a mineral owners meeting at the co-op building at the end of the month, and that he would come get me and drive me in, and we would get all my papers signed there where the company man could witness it and make it official. He liked that idea. He liked it because he thought a room full of my neighbors watching me sign would make it airtight. He did not understand that he had just picked the time and the place and the audience for his own undoing and pay for the gas to get there. After his taillights went down the county road, I sat on that porch a long time in the dark. I took out the phone and I played his voice back one time just to be sure the ground had not lied to me, and it had not. Then I called Ruth Delgado and I called the bank and I told them the date and the place. The co-op building, end of the month, in front of everybody. And I told June to come home from Tulsa that weekend, because her grandmother had built something 20 years ago that was about to do exactly the job it was cemented to do, and I wanted Danny's girl standing there to see it hold. The 2 weeks before that meeting were the longest of my life, longer than the 2 weeks I waited on Loretta's test results the first time the doctors said the word cancer to us. Trent called near every day, and I could hear it in his voice, the thing a pumper learns to hear, the sound of a well building pressure past where it ought to be. He was getting frantic. That lender of his was leaning harder, I could tell, because Trent started talking money faster and smiling less. Twice he tried to move the meeting up sooner, and I had to play dumb and confused and say I could not keep the date straight, just to hold him to the co-op date the operator had already set, the public one, the one with a room full of witnesses. He wanted it quieter and quicker. I needed it louder and slower. Every day was a little chess game played by a man who thinks he is winning against a man who has already seen the last move. The mineral owners meeting was held at the county co-op building, which is a long metal hall with a concrete floor where we have done everything from cattle sales to funerals. The oil company had set up folding tables along one wall with their landmen behind them and coffee in a big steel urn in the corner, the kind of coffee that tastes like the inside of a thermos. Half the county was there because those long wells had touched a lot of families, and everybody wanted to know what their share was going to be. There was a division order analyst from the company, a careful woman with a laptop, whose whole job is to make sure the operator pays the right money to the right owner off the recorded title. There was the company landman running the meeting, and there were folding chairs full of my neighbors, people who had known me my whole life. Trent drove me in like he promised, and I let him. I shuffled a little going up the steps. I let him take my elbow. He walked me to the front table like he was doing the county a favor by managing the old man, and he pulled out a chair for me, and his wife Danielle was already there with a folder and a pen. Trent stood up straight and told the company landman in a good loud voice so the room could hear that he handled his uncle's mineral affairs now on account of my health, and that we were ready to get the ratification and the division order signed and settled today. He set his forms down in front of me. He set his pen on top of them, and Danielle leaned over toward the neighbor lady next to her, not quiet enough, and said, "Bless his heart, Uncle Wendell cannot even read a gauge anymore, so Trent handles the money now." A couple of people laughed, the nervous way you laugh when something is a little cruel. What Trent did not know was that 4 rows back, in a plain dress, sitting quiet with her hands folded exactly the way her grandmother used to fold hers in church, was June. She had driven in from Tulsa and slipped into the crowd where he would not notice her, because Danny's girl was not about to miss watching this family finally stand up straight. And beside her, in a gray suit with a briefcase at her feet, was a woman my nephew had never met. And near the coffee urn, a broad, quiet man was leaning against the wall like he had all the time in the world. Trent saw a room full of easy marks and one senile uncle. He did not see the trap, because he was too busy admiring how well he had set his own. That is the moment you saw at the very start. I did not raise my voice. I did not stand up and holler. I reached into my coat and I took out a plain manila envelope and I slid it across the table to my nephew and I said, "Before I sign anything, Trent, you had better open that." He picked it up with that easy grin still on his face. He tore it open, and the grin came off like paint off a hot pipe. The first thing in that envelope was a certified copy of a recorded document stamped by the Artis County clerk, dated a little over 20 years ago. It was the assignment that put every mineral acre under my home quarter into the Loretta Boyd Family Mineral Trust, 20 years old, on the public record. Older than his marriage, older than his troubles, older than the day he ever decided I was an easy mark. And as he was staring at that date, a woman stood up from a folding chair in the second row where she had been sitting quiet in a plain gray suit, and she introduced herself to the room as Ruth Delgado, attorney for the trustee of the Loretta Boyd Family Mineral Trust. Ruth did not shout either. She did not have to. She said, for the benefit of the company and everyone here, that the oil and gas minerals under this tract have been owned by this trust for over 20 years, that the trust is administered by an independent bank trustee, and that Wendell Boyd, as an individual, has not personally owned these minerals since long before any recent document was filed. Then she held up a second sheet, and she said, "This is a mineral deed filed at the county clerk 11 weeks ago, purporting to convey those same minerals out of Wendell Boyd personally and into a company called Red Fork Royalty." She let that sit a second. She said, "You cannot convey what you do not own." This deed moved nothing, but it was signed with a forged signature and sworn before a notary, and in Oklahoma, offering a forged instrument for recording is a felony. You could have heard a pin drop on that concrete floor. Out in those folding chairs, my neighbors were leaning forward now, because these were people who owned minerals too, people who had signed papers. Landmen slid in front of them without reading every line, and every one of them was doing a little arithmetic in their own head about their own drawer at home. Old Marvin Teague, who farms east of me, took his cap off like he was at a funeral. The company landman running the meeting had gone very still, and I sat in my folding chair playing the tired old fool one last minute, watching my nephew feel the floor drop out from under a plan he had been so proud of. Trent's face had gone the color of ash. He started in with, "Now hold on, this is a family matter. There has been a misunderstanding," my uncle authorized. And that is exactly when the company's division order analyst spoke up from her table, because she deals in facts and not in family, and facts were the only thing that mattered to her. She said calmly that the company had been notified of a title dispute and a possible forgery on this tract several days prior, and that per company policy, every dollar of production revenue from it had been placed in suspense. Not 1 cent, she said, had been paid to Red Fork Royalty or to anyone else, and not 1 cent would be until the true recorded owner was confirmed. She looked at her screen, and she said the true recorded owner was the trust. Then she looked up over her glasses right at Trent, and she said, "Sir, you filed division orders in your uncle's name to redirect this money. That paperwork is now evidence." There was a man there I have not mentioned yet. He had come with Ruth, and he was quiet and broad and unhurried, and he had a way of standing near the door like doors were his business. He was an investigator with the district attorney's office who worked the kind of cases where old folks get robbed with a pen instead of a gun. When Ruth nodded to him, he came forward, and he laid one more paper on the table beside the forged deed. It was the notary journal. He explained, mild as milk, that a notary is required to keep a record of every oath she takes, and that the record showed Danielle had certified she watched Wendell Boyd sign that deed on a certain morning. Then he laid down another sheet. It was a closing record from a real estate office in the city with Danielle's own signature on it from that very same morning 90 miles away. She could not have watched me sign anything. She had sworn a false oath, and she had written the proof of it in her own 2 hands and filed it in 2 different counties. That was the sheet that broke them apart, and it broke them apart in public, exactly the way I had let them arrange. Danielle turned on Trent right there at the table. She said his name like a curse. She said it was his idea, all of it, that he told her it was just paperwork, that he swore the old man would never look. Trent grabbed her arm and told her to be quiet, and a man I did not know stood up from the back, a hard-faced fellow in a good jacket, and I understood without being told that this was the lender, the one Trent owed for the dry hole, who had driven all the way out to the county to watch his money come in. He looked at that division order analyst, and he understood in about 1 second that there was no money coming in, that there never had been, that the collateral Trent had promised him was a locked drawer full of somebody else's oil. He said one short, ugly word, and he turned around and walked straight out to his car, and I suspect Trent's troubles with that man were only starting. I had one more thing in the envelope, and I did not even have to use it, but I will tell you it was there. It was a written notice, drawn up by Ruth and already filed, revoking the power of attorney I had signed in my hospital fog. As of that morning, my nephew had no legal authority to act in my name for anything, anywhere. The soft, trusting mistake I made 8 months before, I had unmade with one clean sheet of paper. And in my shirt pocket, though I never played it out loud in that hall, was the recording of him in Loretta's chair, telling me my mind was gone and my Danny's girl was not worth a nurse's wage. I had handed a copy to the investigator in the parking lot before we ever walked in. A man that's sure of himself never once imagines the tired old dog is holding a recorder. Trent came apart the way cheap pipe comes apart, all at once and from the inside. He came around the table and he got down, actually down, gripping the arm of my chair, and the businessman was gone, and what was left was a scared boy. He said, "Uncle Wendell, please, we are family. We can fix this at home. Do not let them do this to me." He said Danielle pushed him. He said the lender scared him. He said he never meant it to go so far. And I looked at my brother Roy's only son, and I did not feel hate. And I want you to hear that, because hate was never the point, and it never has been on this channel. I felt something colder and sadder than hate. I felt done. I told him, quiet, so he had to lean in to hear it, that I had carried this family a long time and I would carry it a while yet, but I would not carry a thief. I told him the minerals were never mine to lose that morning, and they were surely never his to steal, because a woman smarter than both of us had put them out of reach 20 years back and cemented them in where neither one of us could touch what did not belong to us. I told him a man can copy my signature. He had proved that, but no man alive can copy the day the county clerk stamped a paper, and that date had been sitting in the courthouse the whole time, waiting, honest as the ground. And then I said the one thing I had planned to say, the thing that mattered most to me. I told him his boy, Cody, my grandnephew, who was 13 and who had nothing to do with any of this, would not be tarred with what his daddy did. I told Ruth, out loud in front of everybody, that I wanted a small, honest account set up for that boy's schooling out of my own money, not the trust, clean money, so that whatever happened to Trent, the child would know that somewhere in this family, a door was still left open a crack. Because the boy did not sign anything. The boy just had the misfortune of loving the wrong man, and I have been 13 and loved the wrong things myself. The investigator did not put handcuffs on anybody in that co-op building. That is television. What happened was quieter and more certain. He told Trent and Danielle they would each be hearing from the district attorney and that they were not to file, transfer, or touch one more thing connected to those minerals, and that everything on that table was going with him. Then he gathered it up, the forged deed, the false journal, the division orders, all of it, into an evidence folder, and he tipped his hat to the room like a man leaving church. Trent and Danielle walked out to separate cars. They did not leave together. I do not believe they have done much of anything together since. And I sat there in my folding chair in the co-op building where I have buried neighbors and bought calves, with half the county quiet around me, and I felt Loretta so close I could have set a second cup of coffee on the table. She had reached 20 years down the line and put her hand flat on my chest and held the pressure off me on the worst morning of my life. I did not win that fight in that hall. I want to be truthful with you. I won it 2 decades ago at a lawyer's desk in Tulsa, when a school teacher who never made $40,000 in a year would not let me sell what was underneath and would not let me be the only name on the paper. All I had to do that morning at the co-op was be patient enough to let the casing hold. It has been a little over 3 months now, and I will tell you where things stand because I do not believe in leaving you on the courthouse steps. The district attorney did charge my nephew. Forging a signature, offering a false instrument to be recorded, and using a power of attorney to loot the man who signed it are not the kind of thing a smooth talker walks away from when the proof is sitting in the county's own filing cabinet. Danielle lost her notary commission the same week, and she is facing her own charges for the false oath because she wrote the evidence against herself in 2 counties on the same morning, and there is no story in the world that fixes that. Trent lost his landman work because no company will trust a title man who forges title. The lender who drove all the way out to watch his money come in is now standing in a long line of people my nephew owes, and that is a line I am not in and never will be. I hear Trent may plead rather than drag it through a trial. I hope he does, not for his sake, for the boys, because I meant what I said in that co-op building. Cody, my grandnephew, 13 years old, did not do one thing wrong except be born to a father who lost his way. There is a small account with that boy's name on it now, my own money, nothing to do with the trust, and it will be there for his schooling whether his daddy is in a cell or not. I drove over and told the boy myself, plain, that his last name is still welcome at my table, that a man is not his father's ledger. He cried. I did not. I had done my crying 2 years back over a different grave. But I put my hand on that boy's shoulder and I felt, for the first time in a long time, like the family might not be all the way rotten after all. You leave a door open a crack. You do not have to throw it wide, but you leave it open a crack because the young ones are watching to see whether this family knows how to do anything but eat itself. The oil company released the money out of suspense the moment the trust was confirmed as the true owner, and it flows now exactly where Loretta aimed it 20 years ago. Those long wells paid the trust something close to $11,000 in a good month, and by the terms my wife wrote at that lawyer's desk, half of it goes to build the scholarship at her old school, and half of it stands behind our June. The Loretta Boyd Memorial Scholarship gave its first award last month to a barefoot, sharp-eyed girl from the north end of the county who wants to be a veterinarian, and I drove out to the little school and sat in a folding chair and watched them hand it to her, and I do not mind telling you, an old man came apart quietly in the back row. Loretta would have graded that child's spelling tests. Now she is paying her way to college from underneath the ground, 20 years after she thought to reach out and do it. And June came home. She finished her nursing boards and she passed them clean, first try, because she is her grandmother's blood. The bank had her come in and start learning the trust from the inside, because Loretta had always meant for June to sit at that table someday and understand what she was standing on, so that no smooth-talking relative could ever again make her doubt what her own family had built. My granddaughter is not a girl anybody will pat on the head and rob. She reads the paper to the bottom now, slow, the way I taught her, the way the ground taught me. I gave June something the week she came home. For 41 years, I carried a steel gauge line, a tape with a heavy brass bob on the end, the tool I dropped into 1,000 dart tanks to read the truth at the bottom. My initials are scratched in the brass, W and B, worn shiny. I put it in her hand at Loretta's kitchen table, and she looked at me like I had lost my mind, giving a nurse an oilfield tool. And I told her the only wisdom I have got that is worth passing down. I told her, this thing reads the same in anybody's hand. That is the whole point of it. It does not care if you are rich or poor, young or old, sick or well. You drop it in the dark and it tells you the true number, and the number does not change to suit the man holding the tape. Your grandmother built you a trust that works the same way. She put an honest bank in the middle of it on purpose, a set of hands with no stake in our fights, so the truth of it would read the same no matter who tried to shake it. You hold on to both of them, honey, the tape and the trust. They are the same tool. Now I want to say the useful part. The part I would want somebody to say to my own daddy if he were still deciding these things, because this channel is not worth your evening if you do not carry one hard thing home from it. If you own a little piece of this country, the grass, the dirt, or what is underneath it, that is real property and it is worth real protection. And there are people who make a living convincing old folks it is worth nothing right up until the day they take it. Minerals especially. Folks sign the surface away and never think about the oil and gas below, and then a well comes in and the wolves come with it. Reserve what is underneath. Put your important property into a trust while your mind is sharp and your hand is steady, and for the love of everything, do not make yourself the only name on it. Name an independent trustee, an honest institution with no stake in your family's quarrels, the way my Loretta did. It felt like overcaution the day we did it. It was the smartest hour I ever spent. Know a few plain things, too. A power of attorney is a tremendous power to hand another human being, and you can take it back. A notary only swears she watched you sign, so if one ever swears to something that did not happen, that is a crime with her name on it. You cannot be forced to sign a division order just to get paid your own oil money, so if somebody is pushing hard for your signature you do not owe, ask yourself what they needed to cover. And the county clerk's records are public, they belong to you, and an afternoon reading them is cheaper than a lawyer and a whole lot cheaper than a stolen inheritance. When any of this comes near your family, go sit down with a real elder law or oil and gas attorney before you sign, not after. The careful work is dull and nobody claps for it. Do it anyway. Do it in the good years, down in the dark, so it is already holding the day the pressure comes up. Getting old is not the same as getting foolish, no matter how many young people say it's soft and slow to your face. I read a gauge better at 76 than most men read a headline. Do not let anybody talk you out of your own mind. And do not let the shame of family stop you from protecting yourself against family, because blood does not buy a man the right to rob you. Loving somebody and letting them steal from you are two different things, and the day you learn to tell them apart is the day you finally get to keep your peace. This morning the wind was out of the south, warm the way it gets before the wheat turns. I made the coffee for 2 out of habit, and I poured the second cup down the sink like I always do, and then I stood at the screen door a minute and looked out at the home quarter, where a pump jack I cannot even see from the house is nodding away in the dark under the ground, paying a little girl's way to be a veterinarian and a nursing student's way to stand on her own 2 feet, because a schoolteacher 40 years my better would not let me sell what was underneath. This is Wendell Boyd, out past Collie, Oklahoma. Thank you for sitting on the porch with me a while. Go on and set your casing while the weather is good, and if there is somebody in your family that everybody else has quit listening to because they have gotten old and quiet, go pull up a chair next to them today. They are very likely holding up more of the house than you know.